And they were saying that, well, we think we just have the more established candidate. And I think people vote for him because I think people think he's a good guy. And that is when I knew, oh, yeah, no, the Democrats are completely screwed.
Hey, we've got Leigh Giangreco, one of the best reporters in the Chicago area, the illustrious, the one and only. How are you doing, Leigh?
I'm good. How are you, Carmen?
Eh, you know, like we were
I
saying,
mean,
strikes and
good
betters.
considering everything that's happening right now.
Considering, yeah.
Sure.
So, considering where we are right now, and where we were almost 2 weeks ago with the election, looking back, hindsight being 2020, did you see this coming?
Yeah, I think it's easier to say, yes, I saw it coming once it happened, but I think
Mhm.
it's like a it's like when you're watching a horror movie or something and you figure out who the killer is and then they do flashbacks of all of the clues and you realize that you should have known. And I was thinking the other day that back in, I think this was early 2024, I was at the United Center and some of the Democrats that were organizing the DNC, which of course Chicago hosted in August, they were talking about Biden, who was the candidate at the time. And they were saying that, well, we think we just have the more established candidate. And I think people vote for him because I think people think he's a good guy. And that is when I knew, oh, yeah, no, the Democrats are completely screwed. Because as we know, people don't vote for someone because of their character. They don't vote for someone because they're a good person. They vote for someone because they believe that their grocery prices will go down somehow. They believe that they will get inflation under control. They're thinking about those kitchen table issues. They are not thinking about whether this person is a good person or not, whether they sexually assault people or convicted felon or, name any of the 100 reasons why you wouldn't normally vote for Donald Trump.
So, character doesn't count as much as it used to. Is that the
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny. The more I think about this too, I think about the people who led the Democratic Party in the
Mhm.
past, and Obama aside, I think he's almost like the exception to the rule in terms of somebody who, was a pretty good president. Foreign policy aside and everything.
Agreed?
Can talk about
Yeah,
drone strikes, which of course you know.
agreed.
Um, but this is a guy who didn't have any scandals attached to him like Bill Clinton did. And, Bill Clinton was the leader of the party of this new neoliberal movement in the 90s. And people knew he wasn't a good person. People knew he wasn't a good person when he was governor. There were rumors about what he did to women then. And Democrats stood by him because he was successful. And so I think, in the age of Trump, we have this idea that, oh, suddenly character doesn't count in politics. I think the difference now is that, we used to have people like Bill Clinton or even JFK that did all these terrible things to women behind the
Mhm,
scenes, and everybody in DC knew about it, but
mhm.
they didn't acknowledge it up front, or it was kind of like only a few people acknowledged it publicly. And now you have Trump, who not only do other people acknowledge it publicly, but he just admits to it publicly and he has no shame about it. So I think that's the difference now, is shame doesn't count as much in politics anymore.
Well, here's something that struck me in the aftermath of hindsight being 2020. Why is it, and this is me sandbagging the news media, and you could either jump on or defend. Why was it that Trump was allowed to be lawless, whereas Kamala Harris had to be flawless when it came to the election? He could say whatever he wanted, whereas she could tell people numerous times and make available her policy positions to any number of platforms, and yet people kept saying she doesn't tell us what she stands for.
Hmm.
How did we get to a place? And this is a news media critique that I've been making, and I'm wondering if you've seen it as well. How did we allow that to happen as journalists?
Well, I mean, I do think she was actually pretty light on policy. I mean, maybe that was partially because she came in so late, and so she was stuck in this weird position of,
Right.
does she distance herself from President Biden, who has been unpopular, or does she, stick with this? And it's kind of that like Selena Meyer change with continuity platform.
Right.
So she was in a tough position in terms of like actually stating what her policies were. Yeah, I mean, this whole election is just Veep, as many people have pointed out.
Yes.
Um, but I think when you talk about why don't people point out what happened with Trump? I mean, I do think there was tons of coverage of his trial. I think that was kind of, done ad nauseum. And so I don't think the news media ignored that at all. If anything, they covered that. I don't want to say too much. It was historic, I guess. But Trump has become this Teflon politician where, again, because he has no shame about anything and he says these things himself and he says them with pride, it's really hard to um, point out that what he's doing is wrong. It's like this is why he's effective, because he's essentially a schoolyard bully who uses these, sort of schoolyard things like I'm rubber, you're glue. So nothing ever sticks to him. So maybe that's why it's difficult for reporters to point anything out. I think about this a lot. There are reporters who are just dedicated to pointing out all the misinformation and lies that Trump spreads. And I certainly don't think we should just repeat exactly what Trump says or what any politician says without debunking it and saying this
Hmm.
actually isn't true.
Hmm.
Um, but it becomes really difficult because you somehow get caught in this echo chamber where the only people who are interested in um the fact that Trump is lying are kind of like your resistance lib types. And I think the people that support him don't really care. I think whoever is an undecided voter in these kinds of elections doesn't really seem to care. It seemed, again, like in this election, that people just voted their wallets. Even though, I was just listening to NPR this morning and they were talking about his proposed tariffs against China will probably increase inflation, will probably make things more unstable. So yeah, I mean, it's it that's my sort of hypothesis on why the news media maybe failed in that respect.
Do you think that we are also being, well, obviously we are, drowned out by a lot of the very robust, growing right-wing media apparatus, your Daily Wire, your Daily Caller, Gateway Pundit, Newsmax, you name it. There are
Mhm.
billions of dollars in right-wing news media now that is unburdened by the idea of having to report anything representing a fact.
Yeah, I mean, and then, to say nothing of X, right, which is now operating
Yeah,
essentially as its
that's cool.
own right-wing media as well.
Mm.
You saw for the last couple months since Elon Musk has owned this that he's just putting out Trump propaganda day after day, so that's become its own echo chamber there. Um, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult for traditional news organizations to survive in this because people are just gravitating toward whatever they want to hear. Nobody wants to challenge their own beliefs. I don't think this is just an issue with right wing media. I think it's like any kind of media. I mean, I feel like I see friends on Instagram sharing stuff about Gaza that is, not from news organizations. It's from some
Right.
sort of, um, you know, partisan group or whatever. And I think the reason that that happens is because, and I'm just using Gaza as an example of this. You could think of other examples with, the way the media in the US has covered, African Americans. But I think people are disappointed in the way that traditional outlets like the New York Times or the AP have covered what's happening in Gaza. They see it as kind of reporting through this colonial lens, this pro Israel lens. So they don't trust those media outlets anymore. And so they are moving to these partisan outlets, which really aren't news media anymore. And I think the same goes for all these right-wing outlets, like you mentioned, Newsmax. People see that as an alternative to the quote unquote liberal media like MSNBC or CNN, which, of course, if people actually understood how media worked, particularly cable news stations,
Hmm.
they're not liberal at all. Maybe neoliberal, but like these are corporate entities. They are run by corporations. They, have ads for prescription drugs, for things that you have to buy. Like they are motivated by capitalist beliefs. So there's people think that like CNN and MSNBC are, these Marxist organizations, and that couldn't be further from the truth. They're pretty middle of the road. And then they have folks on there that are from like minority communities, maybe to make it look like, oh, we're actually really liberal. We're actually really left leaning. But it's just sort of, um, it's just sort of a gilded, I was going to say something else. Like, I think you know where I'm going with
Yeah,
this, but
I do. Yeah.
right, exactly. They're just sort of icing over their capitalist beliefs, we'll say.
Well, speaking of capitalism, there is a resistance already forming in Illinois and being led by Governor J.B. Pritzker, himself a outspoken, sometimes blowhard billionaire, but of the kind that we like, or so we think. It's the lesser of the two evils. He's already talked about how he is going to be a line of defense against Trumpism, not only in Illinois, but across the country. With him and Gavin Newsom and the other Democratic governors are already starting to form some semblance of a resistance. Do you think J.B. Pritzker is going to be a player in national politics in 2024? He seems like he really wants to be.
Well, I think JB Pritzker's already been a player in national politics. He's already established, these PACs that are focused on reproductive health
Mm-hmm.
and everything. So, from a cynical point of view, you could say that JB Pritzker is viewing that as a quid pro quo. Basically, hey, you know, I help a Democrat in a swing state or a swing county or whatever it is, outside of Illinois, and then you help me when I run for president. And, now that Donald Trump is coming into office, I think that leaves a real opening for JB Pritzker. I think a lot of folks thought when Biden stepped down that there was going to be some sort of competitive primary and that maybe JB could be up for that. Obviously, that didn't happen. But, like you said, the guy's a billionaire. He has huge ambitions. He styles himself as a pragmatic progressive here in Illinois. Of course, speaking from Chicago, it's a kind of liberal bubble here. So most people in Chicago like JB Pritzker. That's not really the case in the suburbs and the more rural areas. There are going to be a few things that test Pritzker in Illinois. Right now, the state of Illinois is running a budget deficit. Similar to Chicago, they're having all these problems about, their pension crisis and everything. So like Illinois' fiscal house is not in great shape at the moment. So his ability to get that under control will show maybe, the rest of America how he could work as a president. But yeah, taking it from like a less cynical point of view, you could say maybe he really does care about reproductive rights, and Illinois is an important state for that. We are essentially a blue island now in the middle of a bunch of red states. We're very close to states that have essentially, banned abortion, or have very few abortion clinics anymore. So that means that more people are coming to Illinois, especially coming to Chicago to get that care. So, he has been really focused on that. And I think whether he runs for president or not, that's probably going to be something that he continues to work on.
Well, Leigh, I really appreciate you taking the time to break that down for us. I especially enjoy hearing about Pritzker's ambitions for the future. I think he will be a player in 2028, but for his well-being and the well-being of his campaign, I think he needs to lose a few lbs, because being on the trail with carrying that much weight around, he's got more on him than Chris Christie, and that would be concerning for anyone.
Yeah, people have talked about that. And I mean, even just if he became president, the the presidency is very taxing. I remember when I saw Obama come to Buffalo, that was in spring of 2010, and he had grayed so much just in
Yeah.
that first year. And Obama's a really healthy guy.
Yeah.
And so that just goes to show that 1 year can take a huge toll on somebody who is healthy. I think Obama was still in his mid 40s when he became president.
Mhm.
I don't think he's still not the youngest elected president, but maybe second to JFK. But
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of people have pointed that out to Christie. With JB.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I don't know. It might make him more appealing to
That's true.
Americans. I
Yeah.
really do think that's something to be said. I've heard this from political consultants talking about other Midwest politicians who have lost some weight, and they've said, I'm worried that they've lost too much weight and now uh they're not likable enough, maybe, or voters won't see them as, Midwest enough. So, I mean, look at Donald Trump. He's also really out of shape. He has a terrible diet. Um, and for whatever reason, that has not seemed to hurt him in any way. So, yeah, I also don't really think it's reporters' jobs to say, like, oh, is this person healthy? I mean, you could say, I
Health
guess, looking
reporter.
at health reporter, sure, but like,
Sanjay Gupta's got something to say about his health, I'm sure. Right?
yeah, I'm sure like people who are doctors
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything, and but I can't really assess like what somebody's BMI is by looking at them or what their heart health is like and everything. But yeah, I don't know. Could that be a problem? I don't know. I think image is really different for male
Completely.
politicians versus female
Oh,
politicians. So,
absolutely.
we'll see. I mean, we elected a really old president this last time around, and this time
Yeah.
around, and the time before that. So I almost don't know that Americans really care about age or health. So we'll see.
I worry about what Americans care about sometimes. Leigh, thank you so much. We always appreciate you coming by to explain the world to us. Come back again real soon, okay?
Thanks, Carmen.